When drought-stricken rancher Elena Vasquez agreed to let archaeologists survey her failing New Mexico ranch for ancestral Pueblo ruins, she never imagined their ground-penetrating radar would detect a massive steel chamber buried beneath her cornfield, a chamber that would unlock a 140-year-old legend about a lost Spanish colonial treasure convoy and expose a conspiracy that powerful Santa Fe families had spent generations keeping buried. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this blow your mind, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I've got something even more shocking lined up for you. The New Mexico sun blazed mercilessly across the Sangre de Cristo Valley as Elena Vasquez stepped out of her battered Ford pickup, the metal door handle already too hot to touch comfortably at 7 in the morning. She surveyed the 3,200 acres of Rancho Esperanza, the land her great-great-grandmother Catalina had claimed in 1883, now reduced to cracked earth and withering crops by the worst drought in the region's recorded history. At 32, Elena had never imagined she would be the Vasquez to lose everything. She had returned from a decade in Denver, where she'd built a successful career as a water rights attorney, specifically to save the family ranch when her father's heart condition forced his retirement. Armed with her legal expertise and a modern understanding of sustainable agriculture, she'd been confident she could restore Rancho Esperanza to profitability. Instead, she found herself fighting a losing battle against climate change, corporate water grabs, and the crushing reality that small family farms were becoming extinct in the American West. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent years in courtrooms protecting other people's water rights, while her own family's legacy dried up in the desert sun. The aquifer that had sustained 5 generations of Vasquez ranchers was dropping faster than she could drill new wells. Her corn crop, planted with hope in the spring, now stood brown and brittle in rows that stretched toward the distant mountains, like accusatory fingers pointing at her failure. Elena walked through the dying cornfield, her boots crunching on desiccated stalks that should have been green and flourishing. The financial projections spread across her kitchen table that morning had been brutally clear. Without a miracle, Rancho Esperanza would be in foreclosure within 60 days. The offers from Meridian AgriCorp had been arriving weekly, each one slightly more generous than the last, each one representing the death of everything her family had built. The call from Dr. Amanda Reyes at the University of New Mexico had come at the worst possible time, when Elena was juggling calls from creditors and trying to calculate whether selling her last 15 head of cattle would buy her enough time to find another solution. Dr. Reyes explained that her archaeological team had been tracking migration patterns of ancestral Puebloan peoples through the Sangre de Cristo Valley, and historical documents suggested that Rancho Esperanza might contain significant prehistoric sites. Ms. Vasquez, your property sits along what we believe was a major trade route between ancient Pueblo communities, Dr. Reyes had explained, her academic enthusiasm evident even through the phone's poor connection. Spanish colonial records from the 1600s mention ruins and artifacts in your area. We'd like permission to conduct a non-invasive archaeological survey using ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic detection. The university can offer $15,000 for access, and any significant discoveries could potentially qualify your property for historical preservation grants. $15,000. It wouldn't save the ranch, but it would keep the bank at bay long enough for Elena to explore other options. She'd agreed reluctantly, warning Dr. Reyes that the property was in rough shape and that her priority had to remain the dying crops and struggling livestock. Dr. Reyes had laughed warmly. "Don't worry about us, Miss Vasquez. We're used to working in challenging conditions. Archaeological sites don't usually come with amenities. We'll be completely self-sufficient, and I promise we won't interfere with your operations." The archaeological team arrived on a Tuesday morning in late August, their convoy of university vehicles and equipment trailers navigating the rutted dirt road that led to the ranch house. Elena watched from her porch as they unpacked sophisticated electronic equipment that looked more appropriate for a space mission than digging in the dirt. Reyes emerged from the lead vehicle, a woman in her early 50s with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades under the southwestern sun. "Miss Vasquez, Dr. Reyes called out, striding across the yard with the confident gait of someone equally comfortable in academic lecture halls and remote field work. "Thank you so much for allowing us access to your property. Based on our preliminary research, this could be one of the most significant archaeological sites in northern New Mexico." Elena shook the professor's calloused hand, noting the sincere enthusiasm in her dark eyes. Despite her own desperate circumstances, she found herself genuinely interested in what the team might discover. Her great-great-grandmother Catalina had always insisted that the land held secrets older than the Spanish colonial period, stories that had been passed down through generations of indigenous peoples who had considered this valley sacred long before Europeans arrived. "My family's always known there was something special about this land," Elena admitted as they walked toward the area where Dr. Reyes wanted to begin the survey. "My great-great-grandmother used to tell stories about finding pottery shards and arrowheads when she first broke ground for planting. She said the Pueblo peoples considered this valley a place of power." Dr. Reyes nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly what we're hoping to document. Your great-great-grandmother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. It takes incredible courage to claim land in an unknown territory and build something lasting." They paused at the edge of Elena's cornfield, where the dying stalks created an eerie landscape of agricultural failure. Elena felt a familiar tightness in her chest as she looked across the rows where her hopes for the ranch's future had withered along with the corn. "I'm sorry about the condition of the crops," Elena said, gesturing toward the brown expanse. "This drought has been devastating. I keep thinking about what Catalina would do in this situation, but she never had to deal with climate change on this scale." Dr. Reyes placed a sympathetic hand on Elena's shoulder. "I can't imagine how difficult this must be, but sometimes the most significant discoveries happen during the most challenging periods. Your great-great-grandmother might have faced different obstacles, but I suspect she would admire your determination to keep fighting." As Dr. Reyes's team began setting up their equipment along the eastern boundary of the cornfield, Elena returned to the endless cycle of ranch maintenance that had consumed her life for the past 2 years. She checked the water levels in her remaining stock tanks, repaired sections of fence that had been damaged by desperate wildlife seeking water, and made difficult calculations about which parts of her operation to abandon next. The archaeological team worked with methodical precision, their ground-penetrating radar equipment creating a systematic grid across the corner of Elena's property. She watched them intermittently throughout the day, noting their professional efficiency and the way they documented every measurement and soil sample. Part of her envied their academic mission, so different from her daily struggle for basic survival. Elena was repairing a broken gate latch when she heard Dr. Reyes calling her name with an urgency that made her drop her tools and run toward the cornfield. She found the entire archaeological team clustered around their equipment trailer, all staring at a laptop screen that displayed what appeared to be a three-dimensional underground map. "Elena, you need to see this immediately," Dr. Reyes said, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement. "We found something that shouldn't exist." Elena approached the screen, trying to make sense of the colorful patterns and geometric shapes displayed on the radar readout. In the center of the image was a large, clearly artificial structure buried deep beneath the surface of her cornfield. "What am I looking at?" Elena asked, though something in her gut already suspected the answer would change everything. Dr. Reyes pointed to the rectangular shape on the screen, her finger tracing its outline. "This is a massive artificial structure buried approximately 14 feet. Based on the radar signature, it's constructed of metal, possibly iron or steel, and measures roughly 18 feet. The walls appear to be at least 6 inches thick, and there's definitely a hollow interior space." Elena stared at the image, her mind racing through possibilities. Could it be an old root cellar? Maybe something my great-great-grandmother's family built. "Root cellars aren't constructed like this," Dr. Reyes replied, shaking her head. "This structure was engineered to be completely sealed and to withstand tremendous pressure. Look at these The metal composition suggests steel alloys that weren't commonly available until the mid-1800s. And the construction technique indicates professional engineering, not homestead construction." Dr. Miguel Santos, the team's geophysical specialist, looked up from his equipment with an expression of professional bewilderment. "Professor Reyes, I've been doing ground penetrating for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The density readings suggest whatever is inside this structure is extremely heavy, possibly precious metals or dense stone. And look at this anomaly here." He pointed to a section of the readout. "There appears to be some kind of mechanical locking mechanism on what might be the access point." Elena felt her heart beat. Reyes corrected carefully. "What's inside could be anything: archaeological artifacts, historical documents, or yes, possibly valuables that someone wanted to keep safe." "But Elena, based on the construction and burial depth, this has been here for a very long time." Dr. Santos pulled up additional data on his screen. "There's something else unusual about the placement. Whoever buried this chose the location very carefully. It's positioned at the exact center of what would have been the natural drainage pattern for this valley, which means it would have been completely invisible from the surface even during heavy rains. This wasn't hidden by accident. This was professionally concealed by people who understood engineering and hydrology. Elena looked across her failing cornfield with new eyes, trying to imagine the valley as it would have appeared 140 years ago when her great-great-grandmother first arrived. The land that had seemed like nothing but agricultural heartbreak suddenly held the possibility of secrets that could change everything. "What do we do now?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Dr. Ray exchanged glances with her team members before answering. "Officially, we need to follow proper archaeological protocols, document everything, contact the state archaeology office, possibly bring in additional specialists. But Elena, I have to be honest with you, a discovery like this could attract a lot of attention. If there are valuables down there, or if this site has historical significance, you might find yourself dealing with treasure hunters, government agencies, and people who have been looking for something like this for a very long time." The warning in Dr. Reyes' voice sent a chill through Elena, despite the afternoon heat. "What do you mean, people who have been looking for something like this?" New Mexico has a lot of legends about lost Spanish treasures, missing military payrolls, and valuables hidden during periods of conflict, Dr. Reyes explained. "Most of them are myths, but occasionally we find evidence that some of these stories have a basis in fact. If word gets out about what we found here, you could have complications you never anticipated." Elena thought about the financial pressure she was under, the approaching foreclosure, and the corporate buyers who had been circling her property like vultures. Now she was being told that the solution to all her problems might be buried beneath the very crops that were failing to save her ranch, but that solution might come with dangers she couldn't yet understand. "How long would it take to excavate whatever is down there?" she asked. Dr. Santos consulted his notes. "With the proper equipment and a full crew, probably 3 to 4 days to reach the structure and determine how to access it safely. Vasquez, this kind of excavation requires permits, environmental assessments, and potentially involving federal agencies, if we find anything of historical significance." "And how long would all those permits and assessments take?" Dr. Reyes grimaced. "Months, possibly years, and once the bureaucracy gets involved, you'd lose control of the process entirely. Any discoveries would become the property of the state or federal government for study and preservation." Elena looked across her dying cornfield toward the mountains, where her great-great-grandmother had first gazed, when she claimed this land with nothing but determination and hope. Catalina Vasquez had taken enormous risks to build something lasting for her family. Now Elena faced a choice that could either save everything Catalina had built or destroy it completely. "Can you keep this discovery quiet while I decide what to do?" Elena asked. Dr. Reyes nodded slowly. "For now, yes. My team understands the sensitivity of the situation. But Elena, whatever is down there, has been waiting for 140 years to be found. I don't think it can wait much longer." As the sun began to set behind the Sangre de Cristo mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that matched the autumn landscape, Elena stood in her cornfield above a mystery that could either save her family's legacy or thrust her into dangers she couldn't yet imagine. The drought that had threatened to destroy everything might have been the very thing that led her to salvation, or to something far more complicated than financial rescue.
The land that her great-great-grandmother had claimed with such hope and determination held secrets that were about to transform Elena's understanding of her family's history and her own future. Whatever lay buried 14 feet beneath the failing corn might hold the answers to questions she had never thought to ask, and the solution to problems she had never imagined facing. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to follow the careful legal path that might take years to yield results, or to take the kind of risk that her ancestor Catalina would have understood, the kind of risk that could change everything, for better or worse. What Elena didn't yet know was that her decision had already been made for her by people who had been watching Rancho Esperanza for generations, waiting for exactly this moment when desperation would force someone to dig deep enough to uncover what had been hidden since the violent days of the American territorial period. The vault beneath her cornfield held more than treasure. It held truth that powerful families in Santa Fe had spent 140 years ensuring would never come to light. As she walked back toward the ranch house, Elena felt the weight of 5 generations of Vasquez dreams on her shoulders, and the electric anticipation that comes with standing at the edge of discovery. Tomorrow would bring choices that would determine not just the fate of Rancho Esperanza, but the revelation of secrets that had been buried deeper than any treasure vault could protect. The stage was set for a confrontation between past and present, between powerful interests, and a determined woman who was about to learn that sometimes the most valuable discoveries come at the highest cost.
Elena spent a sleepless night pacing the worn wooden floors of the ranch house that had sheltered 5 generations of Vasquez women. The walls seemed to whisper with the voices of her ancestors, each generation facing their own impossible choices, their own moments when courage and desperation intersected in ways that would define the family's future forever. By dawn, she had made her decision. Dr. Reyes was already in the cornfield when Elena emerged from the house, her archaeological equipment humming quietly in the morning air, as she conducted additional scans of the mysterious underground structure. The professor looked up as Elena approached, coffee mug in hand, her expression a mixture of professional curiosity and barely contained excitement. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Elena said without preamble. "How quickly could we excavate that vault if we decided to bypass the official channels?" Dr. Reyes set down her tablet and studied Elena's face carefully. "That's not a decision to make lightly. Once we break ground without permits, we're crossing a line we can't uncross. And if there are people who have been looking for whatever is down there, unauthorized digging could attract exactly the kind of attention you don't want." Elena gestured toward her dying cornfield, then toward the stack of foreclosure notices visible through the ranch house window. "Dr. Reyes, I'm 60 days away from losing everything my family has built over 5 generations. Whatever bureaucratic process might eventually give me access to that vault won't happen fast enough to save this ranch. If there's something down there that could change my situation, I need to know what it is now, not in 2 years after the State Archaeology Department finishes their paperwork." Dr. Reyes nodded slowly, understanding evident in her weathered features. "I've seen what happens to family operations like this. The bureaucracy doesn't care about your timeline, and the corporate buyers don't care about your history. But Elena, if we do this, we need to be smart about it. We need a cover story. We need to work at night, and we need to be prepared for the possibility that we find something that changes everything." "What kind of cover story?" "Emergency water well drilling," Dr. Reyes replied immediately, clearly having thought this through during her own sleepless night. The drought gives you perfect justification for drilling new wells anywhere on your property. I have contacts who can provide the proper drilling equipment, and we can work under the assumption that we're looking for water until we reach the vault level. Elena felt a surge of gratitude mixed with apprehension. You're willing to risk your academic career to help me, Dr. Reyes was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting across the landscape where centuries of people had struggled to build lives from unforgiving land. My grandmother was forced to sell her family's ranch in Sonora during the Mexican Revolution. She used to tell me stories about the treasures that families buried when they had to flee, hoping to return someday and reclaim what they'd hidden. Most never got that chance. If there's something down there that belongs to your family's history, Elena, then maybe it's time for one of those stories to have a different ending. That afternoon, while Dr. Reyes made discreet inquiries about drilling equipment, Elena drove into the town of Milagro to run errands and gauge whether anyone had heard about the archaeological survey at her ranch. The small community had been her family's home base for over a century, and news traveled through the local businesses and cafes with the efficiency of a telegraph system. At Herrera's Feed and Supply, where the Vasquez family had bought ranch supplies for 4 generations, Elena encountered the first sign that her discovery might already be attracting unwanted attention. Old Manuel Herrera, who had known Elena's father since childhood, pulled her aside while she was loading salt blocks into her truck. "Mija," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard, "there were some men here yesterday asking questions about your ranch. Well-dressed guys, not locals. They said they were investors interested in agricultural properties, but they asked specifically about whether you'd been doing any excavation or construction work recently." Elena's stomach clenched. "What kind of questions?" "Wanted to know about your water situation, whether you'd been drilling new wells, if there had been any unusual activity with heavy machinery." I told them your business was your own. But Elena, these weren't the kind of men who usually come through Milagro looking at farmland. These were the kind of men who already know exactly what they're looking for. Elena thanked Manuel and completed her errands with growing unease, noticing for the first time how many unfamiliar vehicles seemed to be parked around town, and how many out-of-state license plates she encountered on the normally quiet roads leading to and from her ranch. By the time she returned to Rancho Esperanza, Dr. Reyes had arranged for drilling equipment to arrive that evening, along with 2 additional team members she trusted completely. "We need to move fast," Dr. Reyes explained as they reviewed the plan one final time. "I made some discreet inquiries with colleagues in Santa Fe, and there are rumors circulating in academic circles about a significant archaeological discovery in the Sangre de Cristo Valley. Someone is spreading information about our find, which means we're probably running out of time to investigate on our own terms." Dr. Miguel Santos had spent the day refining his radar scans and creating detailed 3-dimensional models of the buried structure. "The good news is that the vault appears to be accessible from the top. There's definitely some kind of entry mechanism built into the upper surface. The challenging news is that it's buried under 14 feet of extremely compacted soil, which suggests it was concealed using professional engineering techniques." Dr. Santos pulled up additional images on his laptop. "But there's something else interesting about the placement. I've been analyzing the geological data, and this vault was positioned to take advantage of natural underground water flow patterns. Whoever buried it understood hydrology well enough to ensure that groundwater would flow around the structure rather than through it, which means the contents should be completely dry and preserved." As darkness fell across the valley, The drilling equipment arrived as scheduled, a truck-mounted auger system operated by two men Dr. Reyes introduced simply as Carlos and Francisco, experienced well drillers who had worked with archaeologists before and understood the need for discretion. Elena watched nervously as they positioned their equipment directly over the coordinates. Dr. Santos had identified the powerful lights they had set up, casting stark shadows across the cornfield. "Remember, Dr. Reyes cautioned as the drilling began, if anyone comes by, we're drilling an emergency water well to save your crops. Carlos and Francisco have the proper permits for well drilling, so we're not technically breaking any laws until we reach the vault level." The drill bit chewed through the hard-packed earth with methodical efficiency, each foot of progress bringing them closer to answers that had been buried for nearly 140 years. Elena found herself thinking about her great-great-grandmother Catalina, wondering what the strong-willed woman would think about her descendant drilling through the night in search of secrets that might save or doom everything the family had built. By midnight, they had reached 10 feet without encountering anything unusual. The drill samples showed typical high desert soil composition, sand, clay, and scattered rock fragments that told the geological story of millennia, but revealed nothing about human activity. Elena began to wonder if the radar readings had been mistaken, if they were chasing shadows that would lead only to deeper financial ruin. Then at 13 feet and 8 inches, the drill bit struck something that rang like a bell. "Stop drilling, Doctor," Santos called out, studying his instruments with intense focus. "We've hit the structure." Carlos shut down the drilling equipment, and the sudden silence felt profound after hours of mechanical noise. Elena realized she was holding her breath as Dr. Reyes lowered a specialized camera into the drill hole, its LED lights illuminating whatever lay at the bottom of their excavation. "Mother of God," Dr. Reyes whispered, staring at the camera feed displayed on her tablet. Elena looked over the professor's shoulder at the screen, and saw what appeared to be a smooth metal surface engraved with intricate designs. The camera's light revealed symbols that looked like a mixture of Spanish colonial heraldry and indigenous pictographs, arranged around what was unmistakably a keyhole of unusual design. "It's definitely a vault," Dr. Santos confirmed, taking his own photographs through the camera system. "And based on the metalwork and engraving style, I'd estimated dates to the 80s, possibly earlier. But Elena, look at this craftsmanship. This wasn't made by local blacksmiths. This is the work of master metal workers, possibly European-trained artisans." Dr. Reyes maneuvered the camera to capture different angles of the vault's surface. "The engravings tell a story. These symbols here represent Spanish colonial authority, but they're integrated with what appears to be Pueblo pictographs. And this central design, it looks like a map of some kind." Elena studied the images with growing excitement and apprehension. The vault was clearly the work of people with significant resources and sophisticated knowledge, not the kind of simple treasure cache that desperate people might bury in times of trouble. This was something far more complex and potentially far more valuable. "How do we get inside?" Elena asked. Dr. Santos measured the keyhole carefully using specialized instruments. "This is a very unusual locking mechanism. The keyhole is diamond-shaped rather than circular, which suggests a specialized key designed specifically for this vault. But there's something else. There appear to be additional mechanical elements around the keyhole, possibly indicating a combination system as well." Carlos, who had been listening to the discussion with the practical interest of someone who had spent decades working with mechanical systems,
leaned over the drill hole and studied the vault surface through his own flashlight beam. "That's not just a lock," he said thoughtfully. "That's a puzzle. See these engravings around the keyhole? They're not just decorative. Those are instructions." Dr. Reyes looked at Carlos with renewed respect. "What kind of instructions?" "My grandfather was a locksmith in Guadalajara before he came north during the revolution. He taught me to read the language that craftsmen used to embed in their work. These symbols here," Carlos pointed to a series of small engravings around the vault's perimeter. "They're telling someone how to access what's inside, but only if that someone knows how to interpret the code." Elena felt her heart racing as the implication became clear. "Are you saying that whoever buried this vault left instructions for how to open it?" "More than that," Carlos replied, pulling out a magnifying glass and studying the engravings more carefully. "I think they left a story. Look at the way these symbols are arranged. They're not random. They're sequential like chapters in a book. And this central map, it's not showing geographic features. It's showing relationships between people and events." Dr. Reyes photographed every inch of the visible vault surface, building a comprehensive record of the engravings and their possible meanings. As she worked, a pattern began to emerge that sent chills through Elena's understanding of her family's history. "Elena," Dr. Reyes said quietly, "some of these pictographs reference the Vasquez name, not spelled out in letters, but represented symbolically in ways that would have been meaningful to people who lived here in the 80s. Your family isn't just connected to this vault by coincidence. Your ancestors were directly involved in whatever is preserved down there." Elena stared at the photographs with a mixture of wonder and growing unease. Her great-great-grandmother Catalina had always been somewhat mysterious about her early years in New Mexico, claiming that some stories were too dangerous to tell and should remain buried with the past. Now it seemed that Catalina might have meant that literally. "There's something else, Doctor," Santos said, reviewing the radar data on his laptop. "The vault isn't alone. I'm detecting at least 2 additional metal objects buried in the immediate vicinity, smaller than the main vault but definitely artificial structures. We might be looking at a cache system rather than a single burial." As dawn approached, the team faced a crucial decision. They had confirmed the existence of the vault and documented its surface, but accessing its contents would require either the specific key indicated by the unusual lock, or potentially destructive methods that could damage whatever was preserved inside. Dr. Reyes studied the photographs they had taken, her expression thoughtful. "Elena, I think our next step has to be research rather than excavation. These engravings are telling us a specific story about why this vault was buried and how it was meant to be recovered. If we're going to open it safely and legally, we need to understand that story first." Elena looked across her failing cornfield, as the first light of dawn illuminated the Sangre de Cristo mountains, painting them in shades of rose and gold that reminded her why her ancestors had chosen this valley as their home. The drilling equipment and archaeological instruments scattered across her property looked surreal in the morning light, like artifacts from a different world that had invaded her quiet ranching life. "What kind of research?" she asked. "Historical archives in Santa Fe, colonial records, possibly church documents from the territorial period." Dr. Reyes replied, "We need to understand what was happening in this area during the 80s that would have motivated people to create such an elaborate hiding place, and we need to find out whether the key to that vault still exists somewhere." Dr. Santos packed away his equipment with obvious reluctance. "Elena, I have to warn you that once we start researching historical records related to this vault, we're going to attract attention from people who have been looking for exactly this kind of information. Spanish colonial treasures and lost historical documents are the subject of ongoing litigation, academic disputes, and unfortunately criminal interest from modern treasure hunters. Elena thought about the mysterious men who had been asking questions in town, the growing number of unfamiliar vehicles she'd noticed on the roads around her ranch, and Dr. Reyes's warning that rumors were already circulating in academic circles about their discovery. How long do you think we have before this situation gets out of our control? Elena asked. Dr. Reyes and Dr. Santos exchanged meaningful glances before the professor answered. Based on the pattern of inquiries I've been hearing about, probably not long, maybe a week, possibly less, before either government agencies or private interests force their way into this situation. If you want to maintain any control over what happens to that vault and its contents, Elena, we need to move very quickly. Elena made her decision with the same kind of intuitive certainty that had guided her great-great-grandmother when Catalina had claimed this land with nothing but determination and hope. Then we research fast, and we find that key, because I'm not losing my family's legacy to bureaucrats or treasure hunters, and I'm not letting whatever my ancestors preserved down there disappear into government warehouses or private collections. As the archaeological team packed their equipment and prepared to leave for Santa Fe, Elena remained in the cornfield, staring down at the drill hole that had revealed so much while concealing even more. The vault lay 14 feet beneath her boots, holding secrets that could save her ranch or destroy everything she had left to lose. But she was no longer the desperate woman who had agreed to an archaeological survey out of financial desperation. She was becoming the kind of woman her great-great-grandmother had been, someone willing to take extraordinary risks to protect what mattered most, someone who understood that the most valuable treasures were often the most dangerous to claim. The discovery phase of her journey was ending, but Elena sensed that the real adventure was just beginning. Somewhere in the historical archives of Santa Fe lay the key to understanding what her ancestors had hidden beneath Rancho Esperanza, and why powerful interests had spent 140 years waiting for someone desperate enough to dig deep enough to find it. What Elena didn't yet realize was that the vault beneath her cornfield was only the beginning of a mystery that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her family, her land, and the violent history that had shaped the American Southwest. The truth waiting to be uncovered would prove more valuable and more dangerous than any treasure, and claiming it would require the kind of courage that had driven Catalina Vasquez to build something lasting in an unforgiving land. The race against time and powerful enemies had begun, and Elena was about to discover that sometimes the most precious inheritances are the ones that come with the highest cost.
The palace of the governors in Santa Fe had stood since 1610, its adobe walls holding 4 centuries of southwestern history within their archives. Elena pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the cool interior, Dr. Reyes beside her, both women carrying briefcases filled with photographs and measurements from the vault discovery. The musty scent of old paper and leather bindings filled the research hall, where centuries of documents waited to reveal their secrets to anyone patient enough to search through them. The territorial records from the 1880s should be in the Guadalupe collection, Dr. Reyes explained as they approached the reference desk. But Elena, we need to be careful about how we frame our research. If we're too specific about what we're looking for, word could get back to the wrong people about our discovery. Elena had spent the drive from Milagro rehearsing their cover story, researching the agricultural development of the Sangre de Cristo Valley for a family genealogy project. It was close enough to the truth to be believable, while vague enough to avoid attracting unwanted attention to the vault buried beneath her cornfield. The archives librarian, Mrs. Patricia Montoya, had worked with the territorial records for over 30 years. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her sharp eyes suggested she had heard every possible research excuse from treasure hunters, conspiracy theorists, and amateur historians seeking to validate family legends. Dr. Reyes, Mrs. Montoya greeted them warmly. I haven't seen you since you were researching the Chimayo trading routes last spring. What brings you back to our dusty old papers? Mrs. Montoya, I'd like you to meet Elena Vasquez. Her family has ranched in the Sangre de Cristo Valley since the 1880s, and she's trying to piece together some gaps in her genealogical records. We're particularly interested in land grants, property transfers, and any documents related to the Vasquez family holdings during the territorial period. Mrs. Montoya's expression brightened with genuine interest. The Vasquez family, I remember those records. Your great-great-grandmother was quite a remarkable woman, Miss Vasquez. Catalina Vasquez filed more legal documents with the territorial government than most men of her era. She was very thorough about protecting her family's interests. Elena felt a surge of pride mixed with curiosity. What kind of legal documents? Property surveys, water rights claims, mineral rights registrations. Your ancestor understood that documentation was the key to keeping what she'd built. She even filed formal complaints with the territorial governor about harassment from other landowners who questioned her right to claim such extensive acreage. Mrs. Montoya paused, studying Elena with renewed interest. In fact, there's something unusual about the Catalina Vasquez files that I've always wondered about. Dr. Reyes leaned forward. What kind of unusual thing? Most territorial settlers filed their initial land claims and then left the paperwork alone unless they needed to prove ownership. But Catalina Vasquez continued filing amendments and addendums to her property claims for nearly 20 years. She kept expanding her documented holdings, but not in the way you'd expect. She wasn't claiming more land, she was claiming deeper rights to the same land. Elena exchanged glances with Dr. Reyes. Deeper rights, mineral rights, water rights, and something she called historical preservation rights. I've never seen another territorial claim that included language about preserving historical artifacts or cultural sites. Most settlers wanted to clear their land and start fresh, but your great-great-grandmother seemed determined to protect whatever was already there. Mrs. Montoya led them to a climate-controlled storage room lined with filing cabinets that contained the organized chaos of territorial New Mexico. She pulled out several thick folders labeled Vasquez, Catalina Property Claims 1883 to 1901 inches, and set them on a research table under bright LED lights. Take your time with these, she said. I'll be at the reference desk if you need help interpreting any of the territorial legal language. It can be quite different from modern property law. Elena opened the first folder with trembling hands, immediately recognizing her great-great-grandmother's distinctive handwriting from family documents she'd seen as a child. The earliest papers were straightforward homestead claims, filed in 1883, when Catalina first arrived in the territory. But as Mrs. Montoya had indicated, the documentation became increasingly complex and specific over the following years. Dr. Reyes studied a property survey from 1885, comparing it to modern topographic maps on her tablet. Elena, your great-great-grandmother was incredibly precise about the boundaries of her land. Look at these measurements. She surveyed not just the surface area, but specific subsurface rights down to 50 feet below ground level. That's extremely unusual for agricultural homesteading. Elena found a folder marked Confidential Correspondence 1887 to 1889 inches, and opened it to reveal letters written in both English and Spanish, some bearing official territorial seals, others written on plain paper in various handwritings. The first letter, dated September 15, 1887, was addressed to Catalina from someone named Colonel Martinez, writing from the territorial capital. Doña Catalina, the letter began in formal Spanish. The items you have agreed to preserve must remain undisturbed until the political situation stabilizes. The families involved appreciate your discretion and courage in protecting what cannot be replaced. The key will remain in your custody until such time as circumstances allow for safe retrieval. Elena's heart began racing as she translated the Spanish text for Dr. Reyes. He's talking about items being preserved, and the key being in her custody. Dr. Reyes, this has to be connected to the vault. Dr. Reyes photographed the letter carefully. Keep reading. Let's see what else we can find. The next document was a hand-drawn map, clearly depicting the area that would become Rancho Esperanza. But this map showed features that no longer existed: buildings, roads, and what appeared to be markers indicating specific burial sites. At the center of the map, exactly where Elena's cornfield now grew, was a symbol that matched the central design they had photographed on the vault's surface. This is it, Elena whispered. This map shows exactly where we found the vault, and look, there are other marked locations. Dr. Santos was right about multiple cache sites. Dr. Reyes studied the map intently. Elena, these other markings aren't random. They're positioned to create a pattern, almost like they're protecting or concealing the central location. Your great-great-grandmother was part of an organized effort to hide something significant. As they continued reading through Catalina's correspondence, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The letters referenced growing tensions between established Spanish colonial families and Anglo settlers who were gaining political power in the territorial government. There were mentions of property seizures, forced sales, and what one correspondent called systematic dispossession of legitimate claims. A letter from Father Miguel Sandoval, dated 8, Doña Catalina, the situation grows more dangerous daily. The Territorial Land Commission is systematically invalidating Spanish and Mexican land grants, claiming documentary irregularities. Many families are being forced to abandon properties their ancestors held for centuries. What we have entrusted to your care may be the only proof that can eventually restore legitimate ownership to those who have been dispossessed. Elena felt a chill of recognition. Dr. Reyes, this sounds exactly like what's happening to family ranches today. The same pattern of economic pressure forcing people off their land, just with different methods. History has a way of repeating itself, Dr. Reyes agreed grimly. But Elena, look at this next letter. It's from someone with the initials DR, and it's written in English, not Spanish. The letter, dated March 1889, was clearly from someone with significant political connections. Mrs. Vasquez, I want to be clear about the consequences of your continued obstinacy regarding the items in your possession. The territorial government has legitimate authority to investigate reports of hidden assets and undocumented valuables. Your cooperation in revealing the location of these materials would be viewed favorably in any future consideration of your property claims. Elena read the letter twice before its implications sank in. Someone was threatening her. They knew she was hiding something, and they were using her property rights as leverage to try to force her to reveal it. Dr. Reyes was photographing a response letter in Catalina's handwriting. Mr. Ramirez, the items you reference are not hidden assets, but preserved cultural artifacts held in trust for their rightful owners. Neither you nor the territorial government has jurisdiction over materials that predate American sovereignty in this region. I will continue to honor my commitments regardless of political pressure. Your great-great-grandmother was incredibly brave, Dr. Reyes observed. She was being threatened by powerful political figures, but she refused to compromise her principles. Elena found another folder labeled Legal Disputes 1890 to 1892 inches that contained correspondence with territorial courts, land commissioners, and what appeared to be early versions of federal marshals. The pattern was clear: systematic harassment designed to force Catalina to reveal what she was protecting. One document, a formal complaint filed by Catalina with the territorial governor, provided crucial details. The harassment of my family and property by agents claiming to represent territorial authority has escalated to include unauthorized surveys of my land, intimidation of my workers, and threats against my personal safety. These actions appeared to be motivated by unfounded rumors about valuables allegedly hidden on my property. Dr. Reyes looked up from photographing documents. Elena, your great-great-grandmother was under siege. Someone with significant political power was determined to find what she was hiding, and they were willing to use official government authority to do it. Elena continued reading through the files, finding evidence of surveyor trespassing, unexplained visits from territorial officials, and what appeared to be several attempted break-ins at the ranch house. But she also found evidence of Catalina's countermeasures, relationships with federal officials who outranked territorial appointees, legal documentation that established her rights under previous Mexican law, and what appeared to be protective alliances with other Spanish colonial families facing similar pressures. A letter from 1891 revealed the scope of the conspiracy Catalina was fighting. Doña Catalina, the families whose heritage we protect, appreciate your continued vigilance. The territorial land grabbers grow more desperate as statehood approaches, and their opportunities to steal legitimately held properties diminish. What we have preserved will someday restore justice to those who have been robbed, but only if we can protect it until the political situation changes. Dr. Reyes discovered a folder marked Historical Documentation that contained copies of Spanish colonial land grants, Mexican territorial papers, and what appeared to be family genealogy
genealogies dating back to the 1600s. These weren't documents related to Catalina's own property, but records she was preserving for other families. Elena, your great-great-grandmother wasn't just protecting her own interests. She was serving as a repository for historical documents that proved the legitimate land ownership of dozens of Spanish colonial families. If these documents had been destroyed or lost, those families would have had no legal recourse when their properties were seized. Elena found herself thinking about the engravings they had photographed on the vault surface, particularly the symbols that seemed to represent different families or clans. The vault isn't just hiding treasure, is it? It's preserving the legal proof that could restore stolen land to its rightful owners. That would explain the elaborate security measures and the specific location. Dr. Reyes agreed. Your great-great-grandmother chose a spot that would be completely concealed, but also permanently protected, as part of her own documented property holdings. As they worked through the afternoon, a more complete picture emerged of the conspiracy Catalina had been fighting. A group of territorial officials, working with Anglo land speculators, had been systematically the validity of Spanish and Mexican land grants. Families who couldn't produce specific documentation had their property seized and sold to political allies at below market prices. But Catalina and a network of other Spanish colonial families had been fighting back, gathering and preserving the original documents that proved legitimate ownership. The vault beneath Elena's cornfield contained not just individual family treasures, but the collective legal heritage of an entire community. A letter from 1893 provided the final piece of the puzzle. Doña Catalina, with New Mexico approaching statehood, the legal environment will change dramatically. Federal courts will have jurisdiction over territorial land disputes, and families with proper documentation will have recourse against fraudulent seizures. The time is approaching when what we have preserved can be safely revealed and used to restore justice. But clearly, that time had never come. Catalina had died in 1902, and her secrets had remained buried with her until Elena's desperate search for water had revealed them more than a century later. Dr. Reyes closed the last folder and leaned back in her chair, the weight of their discoveries evident on her face. Elena, what we found here changes everything. That vault doesn't just contain historical artifacts, it contains legal documentation that could overturn more than a century of land ownership in northern New Mexico. Elena thought about the mysterious men who had been asking questions in Milagro, the strange vehicles she'd noticed around her ranch, and Dr. Reyes's warning about people who had been looking for exactly this kind of discovery, which is why powerful people want to find it before we do. Exactly. The families who benefited from the territorial land seizures have descendants who are still wealthy and influential today. If those original documents surface and prove that their ancestors' land acquisitions were fraudulent, the legal and financial implications could be enormous. Elena gathered the photographs they had taken of Catalina's correspondence, feeling the weight of 5 generations of family history in her hands. But we still don't have the key to actually open the vault. Dr. Reyes smiled and pulled out a photograph of a letter they had discovered in the final folder. Actually, I think we must look at this correspondence from 1895. The letter was from a locksmith in Santa Fe, acknowledging receipt of special commission for security mechanism per specifications provided by Doña Catalina. The locksmith's receipt included detailed measurements that exactly matched the diamond-shaped keyhole they had photographed in the vault. The key was custom-made in Santa Fe, Dr. Reyes continued, and according to this receipt, it was designed with what the locksmith called family identification markers. Elena, I think the key to that vault incorporates symbols or engravings that identify it as belonging specifically to your family. Elena studied the locksmith's receipt, noting that it included instructions for the key to be delivered to the designated family trustee for safekeeping until retrieval becomes necessary. But there was no indication of who the family trustee might have been. As they prepared to leave the archives, Mrs. Montoya approached their table with an additional folder. I remembered something else about the Catalina Vasquez files, she said. There's one more document that might interest you, a probate record from 1902. Elena opened the probate file with trembling hands, finding her great-great-grandmother's will along with an inventory of her possessions at the time of her death. Most of the items were typical household goods and ranch equipment, but one entry caught her attention immediately. Special key, diamond-shaped, with family crest engraving, held in trust for future family needs. The will specified that the key should be passed to the family member who demonstrates the courage and wisdom to use it when the time is right. According to the probate records, the key had been given to Catalina's youngest daughter, Elena's great-grandmother Sophie. Dr. Reyes looked at Elena with growing excitement. If the key passed through your family line, it might still exist. Do you have any family heirlooms, jewelry boxes or items that were passed down from your great-grandmother Sophia? Elena thought about the trunk in her ranch house attic, filled with family photographs, documents and personal items that had belonged to previous generations of Vasquez women. She had looked through it occasionally over the years, but had never paid close attention to small personal items that might have seemed unimportant. There's a possibility, Elena said, but even if I find the key, we still have the problem of people watching my ranch and asking questions around town. If we're right about the significance of what's in the vault, attempting to open it could be dangerous. Dr. Reyes gathered their photographs and notes, her expression thoughtful. Elena, I think we're past the point where we can handle this situation quietly. What your great-great-grandmother preserved wasn't just her family's heritage, it was evidence that could change the legal and economic landscape of northern New Mexico. The people who have been benefiting from those 19th century land grabs won't let that evidence surface without a fight. As they left the palace of the governors, Elena felt the weight of history and responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just a struggling rancher trying to save her family's property. She had become the guardian of secrets that could restore justice to dozens of families, but only if she could find the courage to claim them and the wisdom to use them correctly. The drive back to Milagro gave Elena time to process everything they had discovered. Her great-great-grandmother Catalina hadn't just been a pioneering ranch woman, she had been a key figure in a resistance movement that preserved the legal rights of an entire community. The vault beneath Elena's cornfield represented more than treasure. It held the power to correct historical injustices that had shaped the Southwest for over a century. But as they approached the turnoff to Rancho Esperanza, Elena noticed several vehicles parked along the usually empty country road, and her rearview mirror showed a black SUV that had been following them since they left Santa Fe. The investigation phase of their journey was ending, but Elena sensed that the real danger was just beginning. The key to unlocking her family's greatest secret might be waiting in her ranch house attic, but claiming what it protected would require facing enemies who had spent generations ensuring that the truth remained buried. Tomorrow would bring choices that could save her ranch or cost her everything, and Elena was beginning to understand that some family legacies come with prices that can only be paid with courage.
The black Suzuki followed Elena and Dr. Reyes all the way to the turnoff for Rancho Esperanza, before continuing down the main highway, but not before Elena caught a clear view of the license plate in her rearview mirror. Government tags from the state capital. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as she realized their research trip had not gone unnoticed by the very people they were trying to avoid. "We're running out of time," Dr. Reyes said grimly as they pulled into the ranch yard. "If government agencies are already tracking our movements, we have maybe hours, not days, before this situation gets taken out of our hands entirely." Elena parked beside the ranch house, noting immediately that something was wrong. The front door, which she always kept locked when away, stood slightly ajar. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt yard showed that multiple vehicles had been here during their absence, and the archaeological equipment they had left secured in the barn had been moved. "Someone's been here," Elena said, reaching for the rifle rack mounted in her truck's rear window, a practical ranch tool that suddenly felt like essential protection. Dr. Reyes pulled out her cell phone. "We should call the sheriff." "No," Elena said quickly. "If government agencies are involved, local law enforcement might not be on our side. We need to find that key and get to the vault before they come back with search warrants or whatever authority they're claiming." They approached the house cautiously, Elena's rifle ready, Dr. Reyes documenting everything with her camera. The front door had been professionally bypassed. No damage, no broken locks, just the subtle signs of expert entry. Inside, the house had been systematically searched with the kind of thoroughness that suggested professional training rather than random burglary. Elena's family documents had been rifled through, her computer accessed, and most telling, the ladder leading to the attic had been pulled down. Someone had been looking for exactly what Elena now needed to find, the family heirlooms that might contain the key to the vault. They were here for hours, Elena observed, noting the methodical way every room had been searched, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. This wasn't random. Someone told them about our archives research. Dr. Reyes examined the disturbed documents scattered across Elena's kitchen table. "Elena, look at this. They photographed everything, but didn't take anything. They're building a legal case for seizure under some kind of federal authority. This has the hallmarks of a government operation." Elena climbed to the attic, her heart sinking as she saw the chaos that greeted her. The old trunk containing 5 generations of family belongings had been completely emptied, its contents spread across the attic floor and carefully examined. But as she began sorting through the scattered items, Elena realized that while everything had been photographed and catalogued, nothing appeared to be missing. "Dr. Reyes," Elena called down, "they were looking for the key, but I don't think they found it. Everything's here, just searched." Elena began carefully going through her great-grandmother Sophia's belongings, jewelry boxes, sewing kits, personal papers, and religious items that had been preserved through decades of family transitions. Most of the items were exactly what they appeared to be, the precious but ordinary possessions of a ranching family, making their way in a harsh land. But buried beneath layers of tissue paper, in an ornate wooden jewelry box, Elena found something that made her breath catch. Wrapped in a piece of faded silk was a key unlike anything she had ever seen, diamond-shaped as the locksmith's receipt had specified, but covered in intricate engravings that combined Spanish colonial heraldry with what appeared to be Pueblo pictographs. "I found it," Elena called out, her voice tight with excitement and apprehension. Dr. Reyes climbed to the attic and examined the key with professional fascination. "Elena, this is extraordinary craftsmanship. Look at these engravings. They match the symbols we photographed on the vault surface exactly. And here, along the shaft of the key, these are definitely Vasquez family markers." Elena studied the key more closely, recognizing elements that appeared in her family's coat of arms, alongside indigenous symbols she didn't understand. The key felt substantial in her hand, heavier than modern keys, with the kind of weight that suggested it had been designed to unlock something significant. "There's something else," Elena said, finding a folded piece of paper that had been wrapped with the key. "A letter from my great-grandmother Sofia." The letter, written in Spanish in Sofia's careful script, was dated 1945. "Para mi descendiente que tenga el valor de reclamar lo que es nuestro." For my descendant who has the courage to claim what is ours. The key opens more than a vault. It opens the truth about who we are and what we have preserved. Use it wisely, and remember that some treasures are meant to be shared, not hoarded. Dr. Reyes translated the letter and looked at Elena with growing understanding. "Your great-grandmother knew that someday one of her descendants would be in exactly your situation, desperate enough to dig deep enough to find what had been hidden, but also brave enough to use it for justice rather than personal gain." Elena pocketed the key and began climbing down from the attic, but froze when she heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching the ranch. Through the window, she could see a convoy of black SUVs and government sedans turning into her driveway, accompanied by a sheriff's department vehicle. "They're back," Elena said grimly, "and they brought reinforcements." Dr. Reyes looked out the window and counted at least 8 vehicles. "Elena, there's no way we can get to the vault site now. We're outnumbered, and if these are federal agents, they have authority we can't challenge." Elena watched as men in expensive suits and others wearing tactical gear emerged from the vehicles, clearly preparing for a formal confrontation. But as she studied their approach, Elena noticed something that gave her hope. They were moving slowly, cautiously, setting up a perimeter rather than rushing the house. They wanted to negotiate, not fight. "They need our cooperation," Elena realized. "If they could just take what they wanted by force, they would have done it already. They need us to voluntarily give them access to the vault." A man in his 60s emerged from the lead SUV, distinguished-looking with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He approached the house alone, hands visible, in the universal gesture of someone seeking to parley rather than fight. "Miss Vasquez," he called out from the yard. "My name is Director Thomas Caldwell, National Archives. I'd like to speak with you about some historical materials that may be located on your property. Elena stepped onto her porch, rifle visible, but not threatening. Dr. Reyes beside her with her camera ready to document everything that followed. Director Caldwell, this is private property, and you're trespassing. Caldwell nodded respectfully. You're absolutely correct, and I apologize for the intrusion. We have reason to believe your property contains documents of significant national historical value. We're prepared to offer you substantial compensation for your cooperation in securing these materials. What kind of compensation? Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer would be irrelevant. $5 million for your ranch, and unrestricted access to any historical materials we locate. Caldwell replied. You could relocate anywhere you choose, debt-free, with enough money to start over completely. Elena thought about her crushing financial obligations, the approaching foreclosure, and the certainty that accepting this offer would solve all her immediate problems. But she also thought about her great-great-grandmother Catalina's courage in preserving justice for families who had been systematically robbed, and about the dozens of Spanish colonial families whose legitimate land rights might be restored by what lay in the vault. And what happens to the historical documents you're so interested in? Elena asked. Caldwell's expression remained carefully neutral. They would be properly preserved and studied by qualified historians under appropriate federal oversight. Dr. Reyes stepped forward. Director Caldwell, are you saying these documents would be made available to the families they reference, particularly regarding land ownership disputes from the territorial period? Caldwell's slight hesitation before answering told Elena everything she needed to know. All historical materials would be evaluated according to established federal protocols for cultural preservation and legal relevance. Elena understood that this was bureaucratic language for ensuring that the documents would disappear into government archives, where they could never be used to challenge existing property ownership. The families who had been dispossessed in the 1880s would remain dispossessed, and the evidence of their legitimate rights would be locked away indefinitely. Director Caldwell, Elena said, I appreciate your offer, but I'm going to have to decline. Caldwell's expression hardened slightly. Vasquez, I hope you understand that we have legal authority to investigate reports of undocumented historical materials on private property. Your cooperation would be voluntary and financially beneficial, but it's not strictly necessary for us to proceed. Elena felt Dr. Reyes tense beside her as the implications of Caldwell's threat became clear. But before she could respond, she heard the sound of additional vehicles approaching, not more government cars, but pickup trucks, ranch vehicles, and the kind of practical transportation used by working people rather than federal bureaucrats. The first truck to pull into the yard belonged to Carlos, the well driller, who had helped them locate the vault. Behind him came vehicles Elena recognized from around Milagro, ranchers, business owners, and families whose ancestors had been in the valley as long as her own. Word of the government presence at Rancho Esperanza had spread through the community with the speed that characterized small-town communications networks. Dr. Miguel Santos emerged from one of the trucks, carrying what appeared to be additional ground-penetrating radar equipment. But instead of approaching the house, he began setting up his equipment near the vault site,
clearly visible to Caldwell and his agents. Vasquez, Caldwell called out, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. I strongly advise you to prevent any unauthorized excavation activity on your property. Federal agents have authority to stop any disturbance of potential archaeological sites. Elena realized that Dr. Santos and the community members who had arrived weren't planning unauthorized excavation. They were creating a standoff. By positioning themselves around the vault site with legitimate archaeological equipment, they were forcing Caldwell to choose between backing down or taking actions that would be difficult to justify in court or in the media. Carlos approached the porch, his expression grim but determined.